who will be conducting most of the presentation this afternoon. However, this session is recorded, just to let you know. So we encourage you to place your questions in the chat box this afternoon as we go along, and we'll try to answer as many of those questions as we can today. If not, we can certainly follow up with you, and we encourage you to reach out to us with any questions or comments that you have after the workshop this afternoon. It's not necessary that you show your webcam this afternoon. However, if you'd like to do so, you're certainly able to do so. However, with that, I think Barb's going to be advancing our slides this afternoon. So if we could go on to the next slide, Barb, which I think is our introduction slide. There we go. And then on to our next slide. Just very high level, wanted to give you an overview of will be occurring in the workshop this afternoon. We'll first be starting with high level, the policies for Mobility 2045, and this is our Metropolitan Transportation Plan for our metropolitan area. Very high level, the policies and priorities expressed in that plan that was recently adopted or updated by the Regional Transportation Council at their meeting last month. Then Daniel will walk through the call for projects, the program overview, which includes the design guidelines and high level, the evaluation and scoring process for applications that are submitted in this program. He will also provide an overview of the applications that are provided, and all this information is posted on our website, which will get included in the chat window for you today. And then also we'll have representatives from our TxDOT districts, Dallas and Fort Worth, and they'll talk with us or talk with you about the process for implementation for any projects that are funded under this program. These are federal transportation funds, so that you will be coordinating with the TxDOT districts for implementation on projects that do receive funding. And then lastly, we will have the overall program schedule that we'll walk through that identifies the timeframes for submitting applications, and then when we anticipate recommendations for funding awards and action by the Regional Transportation Council on awarding funds under this program. And again, these are funds that are sub-allocated to the urbanized area of our planning area, and Daniel will walk through where this is in the geography of our region. There are funds that will be available outside of our urbanized area, and this will be through a program administered by TxDOT for the state, and these will cover the rural and small cities that are outside urbanized area portions of the state. If we go on to the next slide, Barb. With that, let's move on, and we'll highlight really quickly. I just wanted to show for you again, this is an excerpt from the Mobility 2045 plan that was adopted last month and updated last month. But very high level, we have policies in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan that talk about the implementation of pedestrian and bicycle facilities. You're going to hear a lot today about closing gaps, making certain that we have connectivity in our network, whether it's trail systems or bike facilities that are on street or pedestrian facilities, that we're connecting these facilities together, that they're safe. They're addressing safety issues around the region. We have connectivity in terms of providing access to major destinations, whether it's transit or employment centers. There's also a focus on safe routes to school and how can we get children safely to and from school. And then, of course, that we're serving environmental justice areas of our region. As I mentioned, the plan focuses on safety, and you're going to see in the presentation this afternoon, there's a significant emphasis on projects that implement safety or address safety issues in our communities. And then, of course, we're all subject to achieving the requirements of the American with Disabilities Act. And with that, Barb, I think we can go on to the next slide. We also, as an MPO, a Metropolitan Planning Organization, have federal performance measures that we must address, and it's reporting on our number of fatalities and serious injuries for non-motorized transportation in our region. And so that's our pedestrians and bicyclists. So again, a reason why we're focused on safety. And then we also have air quality performance measures that we must address as a part of our region. And so we're also focused on the means of traveling on bicycle and pedestrian facilities as a mode for transportation. So you'll hear again Daniel and Aaron talk later this afternoon about ensuring that the type of projects that we're funding truly can be served as a means of transportation as opposed to only recreation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Daniel Snyder, who's going to provide an overview of the program.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Thank you for joining us. So for this next section, I'll be providing an overview of the call for projects, which involves eligible projects, eligible sponsors, eligible project locations, aspects of the funding, as well as some overall program rules. So on to the next slide, please, Barb. So eligible project activities, the primary purpose of the Transportation Alternatives Set-Aside program is to essentially support bicycling and walking. So with that, we will include construction projects such as trails, on-street bicycle facilities, ADA compliant sidewalks, crosswalks, and curb ramps. Other eligible projects include pedestrian and bicycle safety countermeasures and technology. Protected intersections are also eligible. Protected intersections are an emerging intersection design that's been well established in Europe and has been starting to be implemented in the United States, which is essentially physically separates bicyclists from the motorists and includes protection from right turn movements for bicyclists. New for this call, education activities for Safe Routes to School projects is also eligible. That is the only non-construction related project that is eligible. Aaron Curry, my colleague, will be going more into depth about education activities. And with that, we can go on to the next slide, please, Barb. So for this call for projects, we have expanded the number of application categories. So in the past call, we had 2. Now we are including 4. And some of the reasons behind that is that some of the projects we received, it was kind of comparing apples to oranges. So with these 4 categories, we think that's going to be a little easier for a diverse projects to be funded. So our 4 categories that we have are active transportation, safe routes to school, safe routes to rail, and safety and technology. So each application category will have its own unique set of evaluation and scoring criteria. So as a way to help agencies guide you into maybe what would be the most suitable or appropriate category to submit under, we developed this matrix here. So on the left here, we have the list of eligible projects and with the 4 categories. Projects that are the primary feature of an application, such as a trail, it would be best suited for the active transportation category, and that's shown as a solid circle down the bottom there. Circles or hollow circles are considered eligible for that category. However, they are not the primary feature of the application. So for another example, if you have if the primary feature of your application is a crossing safety improvement, such as a hawk signal, the most appropriate category might be the safety and technology category. Likewise, if you have pedestrian improvements around a rail station, the most appropriate category would be the safe routes to rail. So we hope this matrix helps you. This matrix is also included in the program guide if you need to reference it in the future. And COG staff are also available throughout the call to answer any questions if you have any. I will also note that one particular project is not necessarily the only thing that needs to be included in the application. So for example, a trail project. You can include other elements with your trail project, such as bicycle parking and whatnot. So do feel free to have a more robust application. If your project includes perhaps a trail that connects to a rail station, you have some flexibility in terms of what category to submit under, and feel free to reach out to us to kind of bounce ideas off of us. And with that, we can go on to the next slide. For eligible project sponsors, We have some familiar faces here, local governments, of course, regional transportation authorities, transit agencies, which have been eligible in the past. School districts, local education agencies, or schools are also eligible, primarily for the Safe Routes to School application category. And new for this call, nonprofit entities are also eligible to apply. We do include an asterisk next to those last two, and that's because we strongly encourage either a nonprofit or school district to coordinate with a local government agency to serve as the project sponsor. And the reason for this is because a federally funded project involves many rules, many regulations that the nonprofit or school district may not be familiar with. A local city is going to be very familiar with these things. So in that sense, it's going to be easiest for a local city to oversee a project and implement it than perhaps a school district or nonprofit. On top of that, the project that's being implemented might be within their right of way, so it kind of makes sense for a city to submit the application and implement the project as well. And on the next slide, we have approximately $40 million in federal funding to award for this call for projects. This is more than we've ever had in the past. And this is primarily because of an increase at the federal level. However, this call for projects is always very popular, and the amount of funding that gets requested far exceeds the amount that we have. So this is a very competitive call at the same time. For construction-related projects, oh, sorry, Barb, go to the funding. There we go. Thank you. For construction-related projects, the minimum funding award is $500,000. And for Safe Routes to School education activities projects, that minimum funding award is $250,000. And those minimums are in place essentially there's a lot of oversight related to these federally funded projects, and these amounts kind of help you get the best return on investment in terms of it needs to be large enough to be worth your time and effort. And new for this call, we are removing the maximum cap for a federally funded project. Previously, it was 5 million. Now there is no limit. Now we can go on to the next slide, Barb. Thank you. For construction-related projects, the engineering and environmental phase, those must be 100% locally funded. So any federal funding that gets awarded is meant for the construction phase. And overall, this call for projects, it's a 80-20 split in which 80% of the project costs can be reimbursed as long as it's an eligible activity that's been approved. There is a minimum 20% local match, whether it's for construction or Safe Routes to School education activities. In-kind contributions are not permitted. And for some agencies, and actually we'll go into more detail, but in lieu of a local cash match, in certain situations, transportation development credits or TDCs can be requested or used, which would allow the project to be 100% federally funded. So I'll be going into more detail about these two categories of TDCs on the next two slides. All right, so the first category of TDCs is the MTP policy bundle TDCs. These are TDCs that have been previously awarded to agencies that went through an application process and were approved by the Regional Transportation Council. We have a list here of agencies that do have a remaining balance of TDCs at their disposal if they choose to use these in lieu of a local cash match. Some agencies have already programmed their allotted amount of TDCs, and in which case they might need to use local cash match. If your agency is not sure about the current balance of your TDCs, feel free to reach out to COG staff and we can help you with that. Next slide, please. The next category of TDCs are the Regional Transportation Council TDCs, or the regional TDCs. So these regional TDCs are meant to implement Mobility 2045, which is the long-range transportation plan that Kevin mentioned earlier. And the purpose for these regional TDCs is to implement and construct sections of the regional VeloWeb. So the regional VeloWeb is kind of like the expressway of trails that connect cities, counties to major destinations. These are all identified in Mobility 2045. So any agency may request the use of regional TDCs. However, that project must be constructing the regional VeloWeb. I'll also note that each agency is limited to 2 applications in which they request the use of regional TDCs. So this is a really great opportunity for making progress on that regional VeloWeb network. Next slide, please. Overall, we do require some documentation for every application. These include a funding commitment, and this funding commitment can be in the shape of a letter or a local resolution. And the funding commitment needs to outline what their local match contribution is, whether they're going to use TDCs or not, if they're going to provide a overmatch. So that will be a requirement for the application. We also do require that all right-of-way or easements to be acquired prior to the application submittal. So that all property must be under public ownership. So this is a big thing for us, because primary reason for this is because transportation alternative set-aside funds have a 3-year timeline, or else they lapse. So we really need projects that need to be have the right of way. You know, any project that has design completed at a certain point is more shovel ready and ready to be implemented and constructed, which is great. So that's part of the reasons for the requirements for this program. There are other requirements depending on the context and location of your project. So these include a railroad right of entry letter. If a project is within a TxDOT right of way, we do require that you also include a district engineer letter of consent. If you're a Safe Routes to School project, we do require a letter of support from a school district superintendent or a top administrator. And if you're a multi-jurisdictional project, we do require documentation of support from a supporting entity, such as if a county is submitting an application for a project that goes over 2 jurisdictions, then we require those 2 jurisdictions to include letters of support in that application. And with that, yep, thank you. If a project is awarded funding, there are, in terms of the next steps after that, we do require that project sponsors execute an agreement with TxDOT within 1 year of the funding award by the Regional Transportation Council. We do anticipate the RTC to award funding for this call for projects in December. Another program rule is that projects must advance to construction within 3 years or less of the funding award by the RTC. And we COG staff work every year with previous call for projects award project sponsors to make sure that their projects are on schedule and that they're going to obligate their funds on time in order to avoid funds being lapsed. So this is a really important thing for us at the regional level. And with that, we can go to the next slide for project area. So the funding for this call for projects will be eligible for locations within the 3 large urbanized areas. And these are the large urbanized areas exceeding 200,000. And these 3 large urbanized areas are the Dallas-Fort Worth-Arlington urbanized area, the Denton-Louisville urbanized area, and the McKinney urbanized area. Areas outside of these 3 urbanized areas are eligible to submit in the statewide transportation alternatives set aside call for projects that will be administered by TxDOT in the coming year. And if you're on the fringe of this area and you're not quite sure about your eligibility for a particular project, on the next slide, we did develop a online interactive map for agencies to zoom in into more detail and to look at the eligible area boundaries to ensure that a project is eligible. This online interactive map also includes several other data sets that are used in the evaluation process for several of the application categories. These include the regional VeloWeb. So I mentioned earlier that the regional TDCs may be used to implement the regional VeloWeb. If you're looking to find out, make sure a project would construct the regional VeloWeb, we have that layer that you can turn on to make sure. We also have other data layers that are used for quantitative aspects of the evaluation process that will help agencies review the competitiveness of their projects. So some of these other data sets include demand zones for walk bike travel, rail stations and the half-mile radius around rail stations for their eligibility for the Safe Routes to Rail category. We also include data sets related to environmental justice, density of short trips, as well as pedestrian and bicycle crashes. So these are great resources to evaluate your project's competitiveness. Our goal here with this online interactive map is to help agencies identify the strongest projects to submit, because we always like to have a strong competition for strong projects. So it's a good problem to have. So at this point in time, we've discussed the overview of the call for projects. Before we go into the evaluation and scoring of the 4 categories, just wanted to take a moment. And I wanted to ask Erin if she had noticed any questions so far that would be worth discussing real quick.
Yeah, it looks like Kevin has been doing a really good job of addressing the questions in the comments or in the chat already. So I think we're good to move on.
Perfect.
Daniel,
All right, so yeah.
Daniel, and again, for everyone, again, this is Kevin Cokes. I did want to note, while this was not posted in the chat, related to the funding on discussion and projects that are eligible to submit in our urbanized area, and what I mentioned earlier about, and Daniel mentioned about outside the urbanized area, is that we do anticipate the state's call for projects opening later this year, and there's going to be a couple options there. There's going to be for the rural areas and small cities, and then there's also going to be statewide funds, a call for projects. Basically, as we know more information when the state has published the rules for those calls, we're going to make that available to everyone. So if you have questions about, well, where's the best place to submit an application? Is it under our regional call for projects in the urbanized area or to the state? Just contact us and we'll help strategize with you about what might be the most appropriate fit and the best place to submit your application. So just want to make certain that everyone's aware that there's going to be multiple call for projects coming up. Some are applying just to our urban area, some will be outside of our urban area, and some will be everywhere in the state. And so we're going to work with you along with TxDOT staff to make certain that you have all the information to submit your applications where they're most appropriate. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Daniel.
Okay, great. So in the previous slide, I'd mentioned the online interactive map in the data sets that will be used for the evaluation processes. So at this point, we're going to go over the four application categories and dive a little deeper in detail. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Erin Curry to discuss the safe routes to school, safe routes to rail, and safety and technology categories that she oversees.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Erin Curry. I'm a transportation planner on the Sustainable Development team. So get started. So for all these categories, we have evaluation tables that basically outline all of the evaluation and scoring criteria. And we have tables in greater detail available in the program guide, but I'm going to give a high-level overview of all the categories. Yeah, so we can, next slide. So for Safe Routes to School, just a note, all of these projects need to be within 2 miles of the school. For problem identification, we're looking to see that you paint a strong picture of the current conditions for walking and biking to the school, documenting the number of students, documenting the problem, and all of that good stuff. Next slide. We're also looking for projects that have previous planning study support for these proposed projects. A safer school plan would be the best for this category, but another safety audit or planning effort would also score well. For these two categories, potential to increase walking and biking, we're again looking to see the current conditions of students in the area, the distance of the project improvements to the school, any other places that would benefit from this project, an estimated number of students that'll walk after. And then for equity, we'll be using Texas Education Agency's school report cards and looking at free and reduced lunch statistics. Like Daniel said, the transportation alternative funds have a 3-year limit to them. So we're looking to see projects that are going to be ready to go almost immediately. Another big factor for project readiness is going to be support from both the school community and the greater community at large for walking and biking efforts. Some more information about this Safe Routes to School category. You're able to submit a separate application for each school campus or group the schools in a number of ways. Citywide, district-wide, or schools within close proximities that would benefit from the same infrastructure. Again, projects that will perform best on this category have previous precedents of planning efforts, site observations, and community input. Moving on to education, slightly different criteria since it is a non-infrastructure project, but many of the same criteria will apply. The activities that are eligible in this category include education materials, training for instructors, safety prizes for students, hiring a manager to run a Safe Routes to School program for a specific area, which could include a city, county, or other division that includes multiple schools, or the cost to hire a consultant to do the above activities. So the first category is problem identification and program proposed. Again, we're looking to see what documented issue that the education program is going to address. We're also going to look at the quality of the program, the number of students that'll benefit. One note for this category, we are going to be scoring projects better that use existing campaigns. We want to see more funding and more time in the actual education program than in the content creation. Potential to increase walking and bicycling is very similar. We're looking to see the potential benefit of the project. And also for this category, we'll be looking to see if you have any partnership opportunities with other local entities. Equity is going to be the same as the infrastructure Safe Routes to School category, looking at free and reduced lunch statistics. Again, project readiness is going to be very similar. We're looking for support from the district. We're looking for support from the community. We're looking to see how quickly this project can get off the ground. Some more notes. Education activities can be submitted on their own or as a part of the infrastructure project. There are specific instructions in the application for both of those scenarios. Cities can include elementary and middle schools within its jurisdiction. An ISD could include all of the campuses across multiple municipalities. And again, we're looking for projects that use existing materials over new messaging. So a little bit more guidance. The education category has a supplemental sheet away from the normal infrastructure safe routes to school application. So a couple of things you want to have ready to go for that application is knowing who is going to implement and oversee the education program. If you are looking to hire a consultant, we want to know what percentage of the project is going to be implemented by them. A special note for timing and schedule, it's a little bit different than every other transportation alternative application. We'll only be looking for a general schedule outline of the timeframes for the activities. It doesn't have to be down to the date, but we're looking for a general sense of what your program is going to be like. Into that note, you won't have to complete attachment E, which is the TechStop project schedule. For safe routes to rail, it's again very similar to safe routes to school, except we add a transit accessibility category for this project. Problem identification, we're looking for safety improvements in documented high crash areas within a half mile of a rail station that'll improve that rail station access. Again, we're looking for projects that are identified as a need coming from a plan, a safe routes to rail plan, another documented safety plan, precedents that this project has been thought about and recommended in the past. Again, we're looking at similar categories and criteria for potential to increase walking and biking, looking at potential transit riders, any other entities that would benefit from this project, the distance of the improvements to the station, and the estimated number of pedestrian and bicyclists after implementation. So the new transit accessibility category looks at if the project closes a network gap, looking for improved access and shortened distances to access the existing rail station. For equity, we're going to be looking at different environmental justice factors, including the NCT-COG Environmental Justice Indexes, minority population and population under the poverty line for census tracts around the rail station. Project readiness is very, very similar. Again, looking for projects that will be ready to go the quickest so we don't risk lapsing funds. Finally, safety and technology category, very similar to all the rest. For this problem identification, we're looking for you to identify the problem and also the potential for these improvements to be a safety treatment or technology solution to address our issue. For planning study, we'll be seeing if the area is identified in the NCT-COG Regional Pedestrian Safety Action Plan, and also if the project's identified in another local safety plan of some sort. For potential to increase walking and bicycling for this category, we'll be looking at the Mobility 2045's demand zone for walking and biking travel, if the area is within a high or moderate demand zone. And again, looking at different other generators that'll benefit from the project. For equity, we're again going to be looking at the Environmental Justice Index from COG and other environmental justice factors. And finally, project readiness, again, very similar. How fast can we get this going? And I believe that is it for me, I think. Yes. Cool.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah.
All right, so for the active transportation category, this one has not changed a whole lot over the years. However, just as a high level, some of the categories that are involved are the regional network connectivity, with the largest amount of points available. We also consider access to major destinations, safety and comfort, how a project reduces congestion, equity, reducing barriers, and along with the other application categories, we also look at project readiness and other factors. So I'll go into a little more detail on the following slides. At a high level, for the active transportation category, we are looking at projects that are implementing the locally adopted plans. And for agencies that are not familiar, TxDOT recently came out with a new tool called the Active Transportation Plan Inventory Tool, where in the application we actually include a question asking, has the agency submitted the local plan to the inventory? So we do include a link to the resource on the webpage, and we do encourage agencies to submit their plans online. And with that, we can go to the next slide, please. So the first category is regional network connectivity. This is where we look at the regional VeloWeb network. But however, we also are looking at projects more than just on the regional VeloWeb. So if there is a project that connects to a regional VeloWeb, that will take that into consideration. If there's an on-street connection to the regional VeloWeb, they'll get credit there as well. If there's a pedestrian project that connects to a regionally significant destination, that's also important. And with that, we can move on to the other categories. That one's pretty straightforward. Access to major destinations, we're looking at connections to employment centers, education institutions, transit stations if it's available. We are looking at projects that are closing the gaps or extending the network. We are looking at projects that provide a seamless connection to these major destinations, or at least perhaps expand access to these major destinations. So these are all various things that we will be looking at during our evaluation process. Next slide, please. Safety and comfort. When we look at this category, we are looking at if a project is within a high crash density area. So that's where the online interactive map might be a good tool set to look at the crash data and where in proximity is your project. If a project has, or if there's a report documenting a safety issue and making a recommendation for a particular project, that will be taken into consideration as well. And we also are looking at the level of comfort for the proposed facility. Are you going beyond the minimum in order to provide that level of comfort that people are looking for when they walk and bike? Over the years, we've conducted studies. We did a survey in 2017 and found that respondents were really looking forward to facilities that were separated from motorized traffic. Next slide, please. Congestion reduction. Here we are looking at will a project contribute to decreasing motorized trips? So on that online interactive map, we include a data set related to density of short trips, which is based on cellular data. So with that, we're able to look at if a project is in an area where perhaps those short trips can be best made by walking and bicycling. COG staff will also use a forecasting tool to kind of estimate the number of people that might walk and bike on that particular project as well. Next slide, please. In terms of equity, we have the equity data on our online interactive map. We are looking at areas or census block groups that are have a high percentage of low income, a high percentage of minority or a high percentage of zero-car households. In the active transportation application, we include a open-ended question for applicants to expand about how their project will contribute to equity. So this census data is only going to tell us so much. So with that question in the application is a really great opportunity to explain perhaps the more context of where that project is and who it's connecting to. For example, perhaps the project is connecting to a source of fresh produce in a neighborhood that is really lacking fresh foods. Perhaps a project is connecting to health facilities. Perhaps it's connecting to affordable housing and whatnot. Things that we at the regional level may not be aware of that will improve the equity of the population there. Next slide, please. Reducing barriers is pretty straightforward. Is a project, does it have a grade separated crossing of a river, a railroad, a highway of sorts? This category will award 5 points for this. Next slide, please. And then project readiness and other factors, just like Aaron was mentioning previously, if a project has a degree of engineering or design that's already complete, that will be a strong candidate. If your project has innovative technology or treatments, I can tell you that counters, including counters for your project, is a really great way to include technology and innovation. I'll also mention that projects that have documentation that they considered the utilities of the area where the project is located. We've had issues in the past where projects were funded and were in historical neighborhoods where perhaps not as much consideration was used, and found that the amount of utilities and relocation involved increased the project costs astronomically, and the local agency was responsible for those cost overruns. So we want to make sure that utilities are taken into consideration. We don't want to delay projects as much as possible. And we also do want to we'll award extra points for agencies that are including a local cash overmatch, so beyond the minimum 20% as well. Next slide, please. All right, so with that, we covered the 4 application categories. I don't know if there's any questions in the chat at this point to discuss about those 4 categories.
Daniel, there was one question about, does it have to be at 30% design? And I think, the answer to that is design is not required to have been initiated to submit an application in this call. Obviously, if you completed some schematics, that's great because it helps the applicant understand any challenges or constraints to constructing that project, and hopefully gives them a better sense of what the project budget needs are. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the engineering, design, and environmental phases are 100% of the requirements of the local applicant, and that would just need to be completed, obviously, before the construction phase could begin. But it's not necessary for that to have occurred before you submit an application. And I think that's the only other question we've seen, Daniel.
Perfect. Feel free to add questions as we go through. This next section, I'll be highlighting general aspects of the application, whether regardless of which category you submit under. These are just high-level general aspects of the application. So in the application, of course, we want to see a description of the project. We want to see what exactly is being requested. Why is that project being requested in the first place? We want to hear the story of what are the existing conditions and what will that project accomplish. With our applications, we do include a checklist that outlines all the additional supplemental materials that you can include. Of these, we also appreciate pictures, diagrams, and maps. It helps us as we evaluate the projects to be able to visually see the existing conditions and see what's being proposed. On the next slide, we like to ask about the project elements. So what type of facilities are being proposed, and whether that includes, not just sidewalks, but perhaps what width is the sidewalk? How many linear feet is the sidewalk? So these are the type of elements and information that we ask for. We also want to make sure that the narrative and what you list for your project elements is consistent with the project budget that you will also be required to include. We want to make sure that those line up and are consistent with the other. Next slide, please. And like I was mentioned, with the project elements, we do require you to mention the width of the facility that's being proposed. Make sure that we want to make sure that it's consistent with AASHTO design guidelines. We ask for how many linear feet sometimes. We also ask for in the application what percentage is new construction versus any possible reconstruction. We want to know what that ratio is. Like, is it 70-30, or is it 80-20, or is it 100% new construction? Next slide, please. We also want to make sure that the project elements that are being proposed will be consistent with the design guidelines that are used by FHWA, whether it's the AASHTO design guidelines or perhaps NACTO. The Texas Department of Transportation has recently updated their roadway design manual to include more information and more design criteria for bicycle facilities, which is a real step up over the past years for TxDOT. We will note that AASHTO, per AASHTO, that a shared use path or a trail, in order to be called a trail, it needs to be a minimum of 10 to 14 feet. There is no 8-foot wide trail. An 8-foot wide facility would be a sidewalk that's better suited just for pedestrians, whereas a trail is really meant for both bicyclists and pedestrians. And of course, the more anticipated volume, the wider width is going to be necessary to accommodate that traffic. Next slide, please. Project maps as part of the applications are really important, and we need those to be as clear as possible in terms of detailing the scope and the limits of the project. The description in the narrative should also match what's being shown on the maps in terms of the limits. The maps are also an opportunity for you to identify the existing facilities that are in the approximate area, what kind of connections the proposed project is going to make. We also want to show the type of facilities that are being proposed at which location. And with your applications, you'll also be required to include GIS shapefiles. So that will be another requirement for your application submittal. If you're submitting for a Safe Routes to School project, like Aaron said, those projects need to be within 2 miles of a school. And then for the Safe Routes to Rail category, the projects must be within a ½ mile of that rail station. Next slide, please. So as you work on your application, we do require you to go through the checklist at the end of the application. This is just a tool to help you make sure that what you're submitting is everything that's required, if it's applicable. So we do require both hard copies and electronic. So we require 3 hard copies as well as a USB drive with all the files included. The call for projects is going to close on September 9th at 5 p.m. We do recommend that you submit as early as possible. We've had applicants in the past that run up to the doorway at COG at the very last minute. Sometimes they make it before 5, and other times they arrive after 5, and we have to tell them that sorry, it's after 5. And so we are very it's very hard line. We can't accept any kind of applications after the 5 p.m. deadline. And there will be no extensions. Next slide, please. Like I mentioned, on the COG webpage for this particular call for projects, there's a link to the webpage in the chat box that I added at the very beginning of the workshop. This is where all the application materials are posted, as well as all the resources, a link to the online map. There is one application material that is not quite ready to be posted yet, and this is flagged on the webpage. It is the environmental checklist. This will be required for all the application submittals. However, this will be posted in the near future. Next slide, please. Overall, just some general tips. A lot of the times you hear the phrase all ages and abilities for biking and walking. We ask for this to be considered when you propose your projects. Like I mentioned earlier, people are responding more strongly towards separation from motorized vehicles and more width as well. And on the next slide, I can provide more information as to what that means. So for a low stress, high comfort sidewalk, we are looking at a minimum of 5 to 10 feet to accommodate people with disabilities or multiple people walking past each other. For shared use paths, or otherwise called trails, we are looking for a minimum of 10 to 14 feet to accommodate various volumes of traffic of people walking and biking. And if you're proposing a on-street bicycle facility, there are some factors that should be taken into consideration as to the type of on-street bikeway that you are proposing. Of course, there's various design types of on-street facilities, which include the conventional bike lanes. There are separated bike lanes, buffered bike lanes. So there's several options in your toolbox to choose from. However, motorized vehicle volumes and speeds should be taken into consideration. So this graphic here is from the TxDOT Roadway Design Manual, and it's basically kind of helping agencies identify the level of separation based on the volume and the speed of the roadway if it's on street. And with that, we can go on to the next slide. So in terms of the project implementation, we do include a project schedule template, which we can give a preview in the next slide. So this template is to help applicants map out how their project will be implemented within the 3-year timeframe that's necessary for the transportation alternative set-aside funds. It includes various phases: project initiation, design, utilities, right-of-way, and construction. And the first half, or the first section, of the project schedule is grayed out, and it shows the timeline for the project initiation. That aspect of the project development process is kind of already mapped out for you because it's going to go through a process where projects are submitted into the TIP and for FHWA approval, and then for the execution of the agreement with TxDOT. Beyond that is where applicants are going to be required to show how they're going to do their design and their construction. So this file is made in Excel. And on the next slide, yeah. So here we can kind of, it's basically a traditional Gantt chart. Applicants can just copy and paste and map out each cell related to how long they anticipate that phase of the project will last. We include aspects of coordination with TxDOT. We've worked with our TxDOT partners to identify, how long some phases traditionally will take in order to develop a realistic schedule. So we really encourage these project schedules to be as realistic as possible in order to make sure that these funds get obligated in time. Any kind of delays in projects is going to be a risk for lapsing. It might involve a modification to the transportation improvement program, which will cause a delay. So pay special close attention to your project schedule. We do show when the agreement with TxDOT needs to be executed, and we also show the deadline for obligating the funds in the project schedule template as well. So this workshop has been covering the call for projects. So the call for projects is administered by the Council of Governments. However, if a project is awarded funding, it then goes through the implementation process, which is then overseen by TxDOT. So just want to make it very clear that COG does not implement or oversee the project. COG is merely in the business of evaluating the projects and determining the strongest projects for funding. We then work with TxDOT to make sure that they get obligated in time. So we have two TxDOT districts in our region that are within the eligible area. We can go on the next slide, please. We have the Dallas district and the Fort Worth TxDOT district. Each district has a point of contact for this call for projects. So for the Dallas district, we have Rachel Twiggs, who will be speaking momentarily. And then for the Fort Worth TxDOT district, we have Iftikhar, they're both great people to work with. They will be your points of contact if a project is within a TxDOT right of way. If the project is within TxDOT right of way, it's going to require a letter of consent from the district engineer. So Rachel and Iftikhar will be your points of contact to request that letter of consent. And on the schedule at the very end, we include deadlines for when those letters need to be requested by. So, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rachel in a moment. It helps to understand, if you're not familiar with the project development process, to be aware of what's involved in all of that. So with that, Rachel will be giving a high-level overview of that process. Rachel?
Thank you, Daniel. Hi there, I'm Rachel Twiggs, and I am the local government coordinator for the Dallas District. And I'll be going over the local government process after your application has been approved and you've received your funding. You can go to the next slide, please. So this is kind of a flow chart that explains the process. I will start by saying that things can be slightly different based on if you are working with the Dallas district or the Fort Worth district, but this is going to be a good overall understanding of how the process works. So after your application has been approved and funding has been awarded, you will then submit your tip mod within the next 30 days after approval. After you get approval of that tip modification, you will send that to the district, and that will basically trigger the drafting of your advanced funding agreement, which is your AFA. With the AFA, we need a couple of documents. We'll need your local government resolution, as well as your risk assessment. And both of these will be included in your advanced funding agreement. After the agreement is executed, we will then be able to move forward with the project, and we would request the local government's first payment. This payment is basically the TxDOT direct state cost for our review. After that is received, we will then be able to activate the project in PeopleSoft. After we have the funds and it's been activated, we're then able to have the kickoff meeting. And that will include the local government staff as well as their consultant, if there is one. We will go over in great detail all of the different aspects of the project, what's required, make sure that everybody is on the same page. After that meeting, then we'll be looking to get the footprint of the project, and that can be done through your 30% plans or your schematic, depending on what type of a project it is. We need this footprint in order to make sure that all work is within existing right-of-way. As discussed earlier, there will be no right-of-way acquisition for these projects, so we'll be verifying that all of the work is done within existing right-of-way. It makes sense. It doesn't appear that any right-of-way is needed, and then we're able to move forward with the environmental process. Please plan for about 6 to 9 months for your environmental process, depending on the complexity of the project. And it will be the local government's responsibility to have a consultant, an environmental consultant on board to provide those technical reports and all that good stuff. You'll be working with a TxDOT environmental PM who will walk with you through the whole process to make sure that we get to the clearance, the environmental clearance. While clearance is going on, we will be working on the plans. You can submit whatever percent plans you'd like to the district. We will already have your 30% or your schematic that has been reviewed. So if you'd like to go to 60 or jump to 95, that's completely up to you guys. So keep that in mind as you're doing your schedule. With every submission, we would like for you to give 4 weeks of review time for TxDOT. These plans go through the whole district, and we want to make sure that everyone in the district has plenty of time to review the plans and give good comments. Also, please make sure to, can you go to the next slide? I'm sorry, Barbara. There we go. Thank you. Also, we'd like to make sure that at a minimum, these plans need to be designed to AASHTO criteria. And if these projects happen to be on TxDOT right-of-way, then they would need to be designed to TxDOT design criteria. And that can all be discussed, in due time. At the 95%-ish set of plans, TxDOT will request a DBE goal for the project. And that is a disadvantaged business enterprise goal. This goal is required on all projects, and we request it through the Office of Civil Rights. We basically give them the location of the project and the bid items, and from that, they look to see how many DBE contractors are in the area, and they set a goal from the project. This goal is required, and it will be verified during construction. And just a note, we do not recognize, TxDOT does not recognize other programs such as MWBE and some others that are out there. So After environmental clearance has been done, we're ready to get the final PS&E plans and the bid documents. So we will request those after TxDOT, all of the different sections of the district have approved the final plans. We'll request signed and sealed PS&E plans from you guys, and then also the bid documents. And there are a lot of certifications that are required in the bid documents. All of this will be discussed in due time, but just note that you need your environmental documentation, your clearance, you need your sealed PS&E plans, and you also need your bid document. The last thing that you need is there's a few additional required forms. The main one is your certifications. And this is basically the local government saying, we certify that utilities, right-of-way, relocation, encroachments, and railroad, depending on, what's going on your project, that they're all clear. All of these different things need to be clear before going to construction for the project. And so we require the local government to certify that that's been done. After we received all of these things, we will request the FPAA and the SLOA. And these are the federal and the state letters of authority. These typically take about 4 weeks to come in, so please plan for that in your schedule as well. After those come in, then they give you authorization to be able to advertise the project. So the project needs to be advertised for a minimum of 21 days. It can be longer, definitely, but it cannot be shorter than the 21 days. After your advertisement timeframe, then the local government's able to open bids. After you open bids, then you analyze your bids and you make a recommendation to TxDOT. And this recommendation needs to be for the lowest responsive bidder. After you send that to the folks at the district, we review, and then we submit it to division, and they either concur or reject the bids. If the bids happen to be rejected, then the local government would need to repeat the bid process or potentially cancel the project. And then if concurrence is given, then the local government is then able to award the project. And that pretty much ends the engineering process. The local government would then begin working with the area office on the construction of the project. And I would like to note that this is an 80-20 reimbursement program. So the local government would pay for the different costs and then would request reimbursement from TxDOT. So definitely just keep that in mind. Also, I'd like to note that on TxDOT's website, there is a local government projects toolkit. And it goes over a lot of the different information that I've given you today in much greater detail. And I do know that it was a lot of information that I gave, but just know that Iftikhar and myself, we are your partners, and we definitely want to make these projects a success. So if you ever need us, we're definitely always here. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Daniel.
Thanks, Rachel. Really, we really appreciate you participating in this workshop. So you're a wealth of information. On to the next slides. Last but not least, we'll be covering the project budget. And we can go on, yep. So the project budget is a Excel file for applicants to fill out. So this is where you'll be providing a detailed list of everything that is being requested for funding. We want a itemized list, and we have several tabs available for you to fill out depending on how complex it is. We also include a individual tab for educational activities as well. So those itemized list tabs will roll up into a summary sheet, which you see here on the left. On this summary sheet requires a few steps by the applicant to fill out. So on this project budget summary form, we will be asking you to identify the anticipated fiscal year for construction letting. The reasoning behind this is because the form will be taking into account inflation. I'm sure everyone is well aware of recent inflation increases past year or two and how they're impacting the cost of projects. We want to be proactive and make sure that inflation is being considered at the very beginning so that project cost overruns are minimized as much as possible. So inflation will be considered into your project costs. We also will include a section for applicants to identify their local match or their choice of local match. So here we will be asking if the applicant will be requesting TDCs or not. So by default, it says no. However, if you are requesting TDCs, you click on that cell and you select yes. You are then required to identify in the cell below it what kind of TDCs you are requesting. So whether that's policy bundle TDCs or regional TDCs. Again, regional TDCs are meant for the regional fellow web. Policy bundle TDCs are for those agencies that have been qualified to use. If you are not requesting TDCs, you can leave that cell as no and move on to part 2. Part 2 is where you'll enter your local cash match. So at a minimum, we do require 20%. However, if your agency is proposing to include an overmatch, such as 25%, 30%, or more, you would enter that value into that cell, and it will then automatically calculate the funding breakdown based on the federal amount and the local amount. If the project that's being submitted is part of a larger effort, we do ask that you include the project budget for that larger project as an attachment. However, use the itemized forms for what's being requested. Next slide, please. So overall, we do ask for as much detail as possible in the project budget. We do not want to see lump sums. And we will be having project engineers reviewing the cost estimates here at COG. They will be involved in the process to see what's reasonable and what's not reasonable. We do include an example tab in the Excel workbook for just to show a best practice of what's an itemized construction cost. We can go on to the next slide, please. And on this slide, we go into more detail into all the different activities that's being proposed. In the itemized construction lists, we ask that you list the new construction, the quantity, the unit of that line item, as well as the unit cost. The sum will be automatically calculated. We do recommend that you group items based on the theme. We also want you to identify if there is any reconstruction that's being proposed to distinguish that from new construction as well. Next slide, please. Overall, just like how the project schedule is important in order to avoid lapsing of funds, the project budget is really important to avoid cost overruns. So make sure that you pay special attention to your budget. And again, like I mentioned earlier, make sure to account for utility needs. And we will also add that the the scope of your project cannot be substantially different after it's been awarded funding as well. And with that, we can go on to the call for project schedule. So yesterday the call opened. Today we're here with our workshop. The call will close on September 9th. However, there are two important deadlines between now and then that you'll need to keep in mind. If your agency requires technical assistance with GIS, we ask that you submit your request for help by August 17th to COG staff, and COG staff will help you with that. If your project is within TxDOT right of way and requires a letter of consent from the district engineer, on behalf of our friends at TxDOT, we ask that you submit those requests to them by August 19th. Again, that your points of contact will be either Rachel if you're in the Dallas district, or Iftikhar if you're in the Fort Worth district. Please don't email them the day before the call closes asking for a letter of consent. They need to work internally and go up the ladder to get clearance for these things. So make sure you account for time when you're developing your application. After the call for projects closes, COG staff will spend time evaluating our projects. We will then take our list of recommended projects to a public meeting in November. We will be contacting agencies if they are on that list in advance to notify them that they are recommended for funding. We will then be going to our various committees for approval, such as the Surface Transportation Technical Committee, and finally the Regional Transportation Council, who will be anticipated to take final action on the funding awards on December 8th. Shortly after that, we will be organizing check-in meetings with the project sponsors and TxDOT staff to discuss next steps, such as executing the agreement. And we'll also be coordinating with project sponsors on drafting language for the modifications to the Transportation Improvement Program. Besides that, the other milestones that were mentioned previously include the executing of the agreement with TxDOT within 1 calendar year of the RTC's approval, and then opening bids and obligating funds within 3 years of the RTC approving funding awards. All right, and with that, we have our contact information on this slide. If you're working on a active transportation application project, sorry, feel free to reach out to me. Aaron, who you heard from earlier, oversees the Safe Routes to School, Safe Routes to Rail, and the Safety and Technology application categories. Feel free to reach out to her for those questions. If you have a general question about the call for projects, feel free to reach out to me and I can address it myself or perhaps work with Aaron on the appropriate answer. All right, and with that, we've covered a lot of information. The program guide is posted, which includes more details. We recommend that you review that once or twice. It should give you the answers that you're looking for. However, COG staff are always available to help you out. And at this time, I'm going to be asking Kevin or Aaron to see if there are any questions in the chat that need to be addressed.
Yeah, Daniel, there's a few, and because I'm not certain if since this is recorded, if everyone's going to be able to see all the questions, so I'm going to go back through a few of them as well. But one of the questions is related to where the fatality statistics on the mapping tool sourced, and so that's posted in the chat. However, that's it's from the TxDOT Department of Transportation, the Crash Records Information System. So this information comes to us from the state. and would be consistent with the state's data. Also, earlier, I want to make certain I do not miss it. Morgan posted a question, and I'm not certain if I understand it entirely, but the question is, where can we find existing status, if any, for plans that may be ongoing for specific routes or intersections? So Morgan, you may want to follow up with us because I'm not certain if I fully understand your question, but we do have, the information that we have available to us and the plans that we have posted online come directly from adopted local plans and local governments. So if that's trails plans or bikeway plans or active transportation plans, those are all things that are developed and provided to us from local communities. If it's a safety action plan or something like that, again, that's the responsibility of the local government or the jurisdiction that oversees that infrastructure. So if your question was related to something else, if you want to let us know, we can try to follow up and clarify on that question. Liz also asked a question about, is it necessary to have 30% design complete? And or maybe I answered this already, but I'll state it again, that engineering does not need to be started in order to submit an application. With that said, it is helpful to have your planning and ideally some level of schematics complete so that you do have an understanding of what are the constraints that you're going to have to deal with to construct that project. For example, do you have utilities that may need to be relocated, which is often present, particularly if you're working in street right away. You may have stormwater impacts. You may have signals that you have to deal with. There's a lot of things that would be desirable to know up front so that you have a good understanding of what your actual budget needs are going to be on that project. So certainly that's helpful, but not required as a part of an application to have that base level planning or engineering complete. Let's see. There was a question about when does the clock start ticking to obligate funds? Daniel just covered that on the schedule. Again, that's basically, yeah, there we go. That you're showing this here. Yeah, we're looking at essentially the funds need to be, or the project needs to be let and obligating the funds within 3 years of the RTC taking action to award the funds. So that we're looking at, that would be December of 2025. So that, not that the project does not need to be complete by that date, but that you've at least got to the point of opening bids so that we can obligate funds at that point. There was a question about, are all TA projects to be local let? And we generally anticipate most would be, but that would be something that the local governments would need to negotiate with TxDOT if it would be something that TxDOT would be involved with the letting process. But otherwise we're anticipating that, and that negotiation would occur after a funding award. You would not need to do that prior to a funding award. But otherwise we would anticipate a local let on most of these projects, if not all of them. There was a question about where do we find the budget form. I think you probably answered that, Daniel, already in your presentation, but that's linked on the web page, and the inflation factor is automatically calculated on that budget form accordingly. If you have any questions about, again, how to complete that budget form, just reach out to Daniel or Aaron, and they can help walk you through that. But it should be, it's very similar to previous years, so it should be pretty self-explanatory. Daniel, you'll have to remind me on the answer to this question, but David asked about, similar to previous years, will COG provide a preliminary application review? And if so, is there a deadline to request this review?
So we will always be able to meet with agencies to discuss ideas about proposed projects and give feedback. We recommend earlier or sooner rather than later. I think a good rule of thumb, David, if you're looking for a date, would be that August 19th. That's also used for the TxDOT letter of consent. Just as a rule of thumb, I think that's a good deadline to use in that case.
And Kelly asked a question. I may ask our TxDOT staff, Rachel or Iftikhar, to weigh in on this, but is the federal 80% reimbursable, meaning covering all costs, then requesting reimbursement? And I'm not certain I fully understand the question. But Iftikhar or Rachel, maybe you could walk through again what the process is for reimbursement on this related to this question, and that may answer Kelly's question.
Rachel, you want to go or shall I?
Sorry, I was struggling to get my camera back up.
Sorry to put you on the spot, Rachel.
No worries, no worries. So the reimbursement, it is the local government will need to pay for all of the expenditures. And then you do request, you send in invoices to TxDOT requesting reimbursement for up to the 80% of the costs, up to whatever your max is in the advanced funding agreement. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, the TA is not a grant where funds are awarded upfront. It's a reimbursement process.
And just to be clear, with that reimbursement, we will be looking to verify that the local government paid it. So we will be looking for where it left your account. And then we will reimburse you for the funds.
Rachel, this Iftikhar, if I can add to that.
Please.
Usually, I mean, this TA program has only construction funds. Reimbursement will be submitted like every month. And the cover letter usually have the breakdown of 80-20, 80% federal, 20% local participation. And for each reimbursement request, the cities can submit that. They don't have to first pay 20%. I guess that's my understanding of the question. They were asking whether they have to pay the 20% before they can start submitting reimbursement requests for 80%. So no, I mean, for each app, they can split that 80-20, I guess, if I understand that question correctly.
Yeah, and Kelly responded, thanks. So I think that answered Kelly's question. Thank you for jumping in, Iftikhar and Rachel.
You're welcome. Yeah, Kevin, I just want to add one more thing. Just the LGPP, the training requirement. I don't know if we covered that in our presentation here. I have added a link to that. If any local government staff or the consultant has to go through the training, they can just click on that link and add the, submit application. Application is right there to take the training. It's required, I guess, if it's a local-led project. So please go ahead, take the training. And even if someone took the training in the past, it expires in 3 years. So it has to be retaken again. And also local government has to assign a qualified person, which is someone who went through this training as local government project procedure training, as well as responsible person in charge and the project manager. Before we can start, initiating any AFA process. Just want to mention that.
Thank you, Iftikhar. And by the way, I will be taking that training class coming up here in a couple of months as well. So looking forward to it. We also had a question posted earlier in case we did not, I answered it in the chat, but just want to make certain that everybody's aware for those agencies that have qualified for the use of transportation development credits and you have a question about what's your balance, just reach out to us and we'll confirm that for you. Just confirm what your balance is remaining. And let's see. Joe Pack asked if you were trained as an LG project manager in the Fort Worth district. Can the training also apply to the Dallas district? Iftikhar, do you want to take that one?
Yes, I mean, LG project, I think Joe is referring to the LGPP training, what we call qualified person. Mm-hmm. Yes, Joe, if you have taken the training while you were here in Fort Worth district, that should be good for Dallas as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And a question was also asked, if a Safe Routes to School project is not in a Safe Routes to School plan, could it still be competitive? So I think, Liz, the answer is going to be, it depends. It might be, maybe this is a better fit under one of the other categories to submit. the Safe Routes to School plan is not mandatory under this call, but it's certainly encouraged and does receive more points in the scoring process. So you may want to think of it in that light. Is it going to be the best fit for, if it's truly serving a school, is it a best fit under a Safe Routes to School application, or would it be a better fit under the active transportation application category, or potentially even the safety category? So it's something that you might want to just discuss with us, or the applicant agency would discuss with us as to what might make the most sense given the context of that area and who would benefit from that project. So hopefully that helps. Do we have any other questions, anybody?
Kevin, this is Iftikhar again. I
Yes,
have
sir.
a question actually. Sometimes there are situations during the design phase which may require local government to maybe acquire a minimum amount of right-of-way. In that situation, I mean, what do you guys suggest how local government can go about, taking care of that? I know they're required to have all right-of-way clear before submitting application, I believe.
Yes, and that's, well, I think Daniel covered that earlier. It's probably a good that you brought it up again, Iftikhar, is that is very critical, that projects, we're looking for projects that are shovel ready, or at least as shovel ready as possible in that context of we need to make certain that right away or necessary easements as well are in place so that these projects can advance as quickly as possible to the construction phase. And all of us know who've worked in the public sector, those that have had to acquire easements in the right of way know often this could be a very time consuming step in the process. And therefore, this has been a program rule for our call for projects for several years, that if the project still needs right of way or easements, the timing may just not be right to submit in this call. However, there are scenarios if you are, if this is a situation, say you're working with a transit agency, those are situations, well, primarily a transit agency, that would be a situation where, I don't remember the wording in the guide, Daniel, but I know it's in there in terms of the ability to coordinate with them, so that that would be a situation where it'd be best to reach out to us to make certain can we submit this application in this scenario where we're still actively working, say, with the transit agency to make certain that we have access and construct our project within this location. Definitely, if there's any question on that topic, reach out to us and we'll let you know if there's any issue there with submitting a project. We'd rather you know up front rather than spending time putting in an application that we would then determine we would not be able to consider for funding awards. Joe was asked again, see if I can catch up here again. Joe, could you quickly go back over the TDC credits for construction for regional VeloWeb? Daniel, do you want to highlight that again?
Sure, Joe. So regional TDCs are available for any agency to request. However, they are limited to only requesting 2 applications using regional TDCs. And those projects must be used to construct portions of the regional VeloWeb. So we have limited number of regional TDCs available, and we have a vast network of the regional VeloWeb. So we do limit the number of applications to just 2. And you would designate which TDCs, which category of TDCs in the budget form.
David asked a question, will a letter of permission suffice in lieu of an easement for a portion of a trail that crosses a school district property? So again, that may be one of those unique situations, David, we want to talk about offline, but generally, if this is a project that, say, a city were to build on school district property, yeah, which is public property, that's something that I think we'll need to discuss a little bit further in terms of, does the city have right of access, or how would the school district grant right of access for that city-owned facility, if that's what it is, to be constructed on a school district property, or is there a way that the application can be structured to where both both the school district and the city are partners as a part of this application. So that may be unique where we just want to talk about that particular scenario, David, if I understand the context of your question. And then Michael asked, what about temporary construction easements? They are still real property rights that need to follow the Uniform Act, and we cannot acquire prior to environmental clearance. However, you do not always know if you need TCE early on in the design. Would small scope changes be allowed at that point to design around potentially? Rachel and Iftikhar, you may want to weigh in on this question, but my understanding is something temporary like this is something that comes up somewhat commonly in a project, and that you can work with through the design and construction process. Is that right? Didn't put you on the spot, Rachel and Iftikhar.
Yes, no problem. Yeah, Rachel, I thought maybe Rachel won't take this, but anyway, yes, you're right. So a lot of time we need that temporary easements for construction, and I think that can be done during the design phase because before we have the certification, we have to make sure that they have that sign easements from the property owners. Also, it's required for environmental process, I believe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with everything Iftikhar said.
Yeah, Michael, I think generally what we're concerned with up front is that if there's a situation where you have a permanent right-of-way need, say you have a bridge over someone's property, that's going to require permanent right-of-way acquisition or some type of permanent easement for a trail construction, for example, that would need to be acquired up front. But for something on a temporary basis, I think then you can coordinate with TxDOT district accordingly to where that can be acquired at the time frame that it's needed. Do we have any other questions? I see we've gone about an hour and a half.
Kevin, this
Yes,
is
sir.
Iftikhar again. Yes, just a comment, actually, not a question. It's important that local government start the AFA process as quickly as possible, because if direct cost is paid by local funds or the federal funds, our reviewers, like environmental coordinator or the plan reviewers, will not do any reviews till they have executed AFA. So that can delay the whole process. I just want to mention that here. It's critical that they need to start the AFA process as quickly as possible, as soon as the project gets selected or funded.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Iftikhar. And again, I may have missed it in Rachel's presentation, but it's probably worth emphasizing again that while the local governments will be responsible for the design and environmental phases, they still need to design it and meet federal requirements and coordinate with you all on that process, at least in terms of what the final deliverables will be so that it's constructed and meets those requirements. Is there anything related to then that process, Iftikhar or Rachel, that you would like to further emphasize in terms of coordination and the timing that coordination needs to occur related to design? Since that would be occurring independent from the AFA for construction?
Yes, I mean, we just have few forms local government has to fill out and coordinate with the TxDOT project manager to make sure that process get done quickly. Sometimes it takes very long time for some of the local governments. I know 3 years, I think they have to let the project within 3 years, I believe. And 3 years is not a very long time in my personal experience for project development process. There are a number of things we have to do during initiation phase and then the PSNE phase. At least we don't have to go through preliminary engineering phase here, I guess, because it will be funded by the local government. But the PSNE phase can take time, and also the initiation phase, which includes the AFA process. So 3 years seems long, but it's not long for a project development process.
And again, I believe Daniel mentioned it earlier, but for those projects that are awarded funding by the Regional Transportation Council, what we do so that you understand the process is, and as he's noted on the slide here, is prior to submitting this project into the Transportation Improvement Program as a modification, we will schedule meetings with the agencies that are awarded funding. And these would be meetings, coordination meetings with the TxDOT district staff and ourselves here at the Council of Governments, so that everybody's on the same page about what are realistic timeframes and phases to program into the TIP, and that we can then help you so that we can try to facilitate that process to make it as smooth as possible before the deadline on January 27, 2023, when those modifications need to be submitted by that date at the latest, so that you can then move forward and execute, well, first get those agreements developed and then have them executed with TxDOT within that 1 year time frame. And that's key, is that the modifications to the TIP, this is a several month process it's quite frankly, it's out of your control. Once it's submitted, then it goes through a process of TxDOT and FHWA to sign off on that. And until that occurs, the districts are not able to execute the agreements with the local governments. So as Iftikhar said, the time, once the clock starts ticking, it goes much faster than what you might think in terms of your timeframes to execute the agreements and then get to ultimately to opening bids and obligating funds within 3 years. Do we have any other questions before we wrap it up today? And again, we are available here. Daniel, maybe you flip back to the contact information if that was anywhere close to the end of your presentation. Feel free to reach out to Daniel or Aaron. And if they do not know the answer, they'll find the right people to answer that question. And he or Aaron will certainly be happy to schedule meetings if you have ideas or questions or whatever they might be. We want to make certain, again, we know it takes time to prepare these applications. We want to make certain that you all are able to package together the best application you can, and it gets submitted under the most appropriate category, so that you have the best opportunity to receive funding in this program. I see one final question. When will the presentation be available? Barb, I don't know if you know how quickly you'll have this posted online, but I would think it would be within a day or two. And then the presentation slides, definitely, here within the next day or so, we should be able to have these available, posted on the website.
I'll be sending out an email when the video recording is up, but I can put the slides up this afternoon before 5 o'clock. And it'll be a day or two before staff can get the video recording back to us.
Great. Thank you, Barb. Well, with that, we appreciate all your time today. And again, please reach out to us, answer any questions. I know with the additional the 4 categories that we have this year, it may be sometimes not always straightforward as to what might be the best category. So just reach out to us and we'll help you the best we can. We'll definitely provide our advice the best we can, and we're happy to help. So again, you see our contact information here. Please reach out to Daniel or Aaron, and we appreciate your time, and we'll have a good day, and we'll wrap up this presentation today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.